Welcome to another amazing episode. Today, I'm super excited to have Dr. Terry Wahls with me. Dr. Terry is an Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. She's also a clinical professor of medicine at the University of Iowa, where she conducts clinical trials. And I was really impressed with this one. In 2018, you were awarded the Institute for Functional Medicine's Linus Pauling Award for your contribution in research, clinical care, and patient advocacy. Congratulations, that's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
And basically, I met Dr. Terry at a business conference, a mastermind group, and I was just so impressed with her work and what she's doing. And the reason I'm excited to have her on the show is because I had a dear uncle who I saw decline over a 20-year period with MS. And Dr. Terry focuses on MS and other health conditions and how those things can be reversed. Now, Dr. Terry, you have an amazing story. I've seen pictures of you in a wheelchair. I've watched your TED Talk, which, by the way, has over 3.3 million views. The talk is on minding your mitochondria. And my community is certainly well aware of the importance of mitochondria and how it relates to cancer and health in general. So welcome to the show, Dr. Terry. I'm excited to share your story.
Thank you so much for having me. And there really is so much overlap between your approach and my approach towards helping our patients create the most health that is possible for them.
That's right. So let's always talk about the pain that led to your passion. That's always the beginning story I like to hear.
Yeah. So, I'm a conventional internal medicine doc, and I was actually very skeptical of special diets and supplements. But God has a mysterious way of teaching us. In 2000, I developed weakness in my left leg, was ultimately diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I sought out the very best people in the country, took the newest drugs, but went relentlessly downhill. In fact, it had 27 years of worsening trigeminal neuralgia, which is electrical face pains across my face. And then 7 years of relentless worsening of my MS symptoms, despite seeing the best people. And eventually, I would decide that I'd have to experiment on my own. And so the first thing I did was I discovered the work of Lowen Cordain. And after 20 years of being a low-fat vegetarian, I switched to being a paleo eater. I went back to eating meat. That was a very big deal.
Big switch.
Giving up all grains, all legumes, all dairy. Very, very different. But I continued to decline. The next year, I needed a tilt-recline wheelchair. I was taking even more potent drugs, including Tysabri. Again, relentless worsening of both my face pain and my disability. And so I started reading the basic science. I would experiment on supplements, which slowed my decline and eased my fatigue slightly. But by the summer of 2007, I was so weak, I could not sit up in a regular chair. I was beginning to have trouble with brain fog. My face pain was much more severe. And fortunately for me, I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine. I'm reading their stuff. I'm reading ancestral health. I'm reading evolutionary biology. And I integrate all of that, and I decide to focus on creating health and on my mitochondria. And so I designed this diet and lifestyle program. And to my amazement, it stopped my decline. It stopped the brain fog. It stopped the pain. And I began getting stronger. And then my physical therapist said, let's start lifting weights, which I did. And then I got on my bike and I biked for the first time in 6 years, and I'm crying, my wife's crying. And then 6 months, so I'm just a year into this, I bike 18.5 miles with my family. Wow. So once again, my children are crying, I am crying, my wife is crying, and this feels so miraculous. And so this really changes how I think about disease and health. It will change the way I practice medicine, and it will ultimately change the type of research that I do.
Now, I know you have a free gift that we'll talk about at the end, but you mentioned specifically eating ancestrally, and most people
Yes.
know that as the paleo diet. So can you talk to us about how that particular diet would support mitochondrial health?
So what we do is that you take out the sugar in the processed foods, which are really toxic for our mitochondria. And then I modified the paleo diet to make it much more specific. We stress greens, kale, Swiss chard, beet greens, turnip greens, etc., parsley, cilantro. I also stress cabbage, onion, mushroom family vegetables, and deeply colored things like berries, beets, carrots. I also stressed organ meat, liver once a week. And then, some very targeted supplements to address vitamin D and homocysteine. And I'd remind you, Veronique, and all of your audience, that the paleo diet alone was not enough to recover me. And that may be because I was so ill. I'd had, my disease was so advanced that I needed to be much more specific and more aggressive.
So what did you do then, if that wasn't enough for you? What did you add that
Yeah,
really helped
so
you
what
turn
I really did was I ramped up, I moderated my meat, and I ramped up the greens. So I was having a big plate full of greens every day. And I was having more cooked greens as well. I was also having, all of the sulfur, cabbage family, onion family, lots of garlic. I was paying attention to the goal of getting 200 different plant species in a year. So I was adding a lot more diversity into what I was eating, spices and herbs. And that's really when the magic happened. Because I'd gone paleo in 2002, and I was starting to add supplements in 2003. But the magic for my recovery that was so remarkable was in 2008, when I had redesigned that paleo diet. And it was stunning how rapidly things changed for me.
So when you added the spices and the herbs specifically
Yes.
to the foods, that's when you felt that you saw a
So,
shift?
correct. So I'm adding the spices, I'm adding the food, I'm having more turmeric, I'm having, just more spices, more diversity. And I'm having literally 9 to 12 cups of vegetables every day. And so it was astounding. That's so surprising, Veronique. When I started eating those greens, I started eating all these big kale salads and cooked greens. I discovered that, man, I crave them so very, very much. And then when I was beginning to recover and I'm going out speaking to medical meetings again, and I couldn't eat my volume of greens on the road, after 24 hours, I could see a dip in my energy, a dip in my mental clarity. And I'd call home to my wife and she'd fix a huge kale salad in a bread bowl. So as soon as I got home, I would eat a bread bowl full of kale salad, and my energy would come popping back. And I had that incredible craving for greens for about 4 years. Then, I must have gotten my metabolic needs finally caught up, and it was not quite so pressing.
Okay. So do you recommend juicing or blending to get all these greens?
Well, actually, no. If you're going to juice, I'd much rather you put it in a smoothie where you catch all the fiber.
Yeah.
Because, you and I know that we have much more evidence that our microbiome is so critical to our health. And if you juice, you take a lot of the goodness from the plants and you make them into sort of a high sugar, high glycemic index drink,
Yeah.
and you've lost a lot of that good fiber. So I do make smoothies where I put in greens, and I may put some fat with that, or avocado, and make a smoothie that has all of the fiber, and the cell walls have been broken up so I can easily digest that stuff. And that is really great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I prefer that to juicing.
Yeah, because I noticed as I was going through my second healing journey and I went back to, really intense juicing, my energy was down. I'd get brain fog. So I started measuring my blood sugar and my blood sugar was off the charts. So I totally get it. I really prefer myself, like you mentioned, the blending, because you have the fiber, you have all the the little things maybe we don't even know about yet. You have the whole plant there instead of just extracting the juice.
Correct. Now we can do this continuous glucose monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a really great tool that's available to see if your sugars are going up. It can help you titrate your food choices to keep that blood sugar nice and even.
Okay. Can you explain that to our audience, what that is?
So we've been monitoring blood sugar for a long time. Originally, it was just had urine strips. That was a long time ago. Then we're excited we could do blood glucose monitoring at home by checking your finger, and that means pricking your finger 1 to 4 times a day, and that can be very helpful for our diabetics. But now we also have continuous glucose monitoring, where you put the device on your arm, and you could use your smartphone to come over the monitor, and you'd get an instantaneous blood reading. Now, it's the interstitial fluid, so it's not quite the same as your blood sugar within your bloodstream. But this is an incredibly useful tool because it gives me feedback that on the basis of my genetics and the bugs, bacteria in my microbiome, that influences, do I get a big sugar spike after eating an apple or not? Do I get a big sugar spike after having that green juice or not? Because some people can tolerate that, but others, like yourself or myself, I know that will give me a bigger blood sugar spike than what I want. So my preference is to have a lower glycemic index diet so that blood sugar stays nice and even.
So where do you want to see your blood sugar pre and post mealtime?
Well, ideally, you'd like to have your fasting blood sugar below 90 and ideally below 85. And ideally it stays between 85 and maybe 125, 150 even after eating.
Okay.
If you're shooting up to 200,
not good.
You are eating foods that are dumping sugar into your bloodstream much too rapidly.
Yeah.
And again, this is really a very individual response in terms of your genetics and your microbiome.
Yeah. So speaking of microbiome, I noticed that there's lots of
poops
behind you. So let's talk about our poop. That's such an important part of our health.
We are really an ecosystem. There's much more appreciation that we depend on the bacteria in our bowels to help us digest our food, to help us take the food that we eat, break it down into smaller molecules that we will use as they diffuse into our bloodstream to run the chemistry of life properly. That over thousands of generations in our ancestral mothers, as our mothers developed random mutations and couldn't do a particular step in the biochemical pathway, but her microbiome could, she still had reproductive success. And at that moment, she exported the genetic instruction for that process from her DNA to her microbiome DNA. So that's why you and I have about 25,000 genes. Although if you just look at the proteins that we made, we would have predicted 100,000 to 125,000 genes. Those missing genes are in our microbiome, which is why you want to have a diverse set of microbes in your gut so they can do all the processes we need for optimal health. Because our liver can filter out the not useful compounds and leave the useful stuff in our bloodstream to help us run the chemistry of life. Therefore, my advice is check your poop, check it every day, every time you poop, have a look at your bowel movements. Are you constipated? Is it hard to pass? Is it sort of dry? Is it soft, ideally like a snake? Is it runny, mushy, pudding-like, or is it tea? And pudding and tea are a problem. You don't want that. That's too much inflammation. Rocks you don't want. That's constipation. So you want to have soft, easily passed bowel movements. Snakes are ideal, but I will recognize that as we get mature, or as we have a neurologic disease, our sphincter control may decline, and those snakes may escape into your pants, and that's really inconvenient. So the big lesson is really very simple. Easily pass bowel movements that you can control.
Like that word, you can control.
Yes, yes, it's very
So
important.
what are some recommendations then to keep our microbiome nice and healthy? People take probiotics, they eat fermented foods. What are your
So,
recommendations?
so we'll take it on two extremes. If things are too loose, you need less fiber. And so there, if things are too loose, I cut out the raw foods, I cut out the fruit, and I cook everything. So that's a lot of soups and stews. You might even need blenderized foods and probably more bone broth. And occasionally we have to go to a lower carbohydrate diet, again, to reduce that fiber. If things are, so that's if you get too much fiber and too much pooping. Now, if you have not enough, so you're pooping rocks, what we need to do is have more fiber. So now it's more greens, more raw vegetables, more fruits, particularly berries, more fermented vegetables like sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, and I prefer the non-dairy kefirs such as coconut milk kefirs. And keep in mind the probiotics. The probiotics don't generally colonize our gut. You take them, they're there while you're taking the capsules, but once you stop, they tend to disappear, which is one of the reasons why I focus more on the fiber, more on the fermented foods. Occasionally, we have folks that need to take supplemental fiber, such as inulin or psyllium husks. I don't use any of the grain-based fibers, except I think it's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Great, great. So let's swing back to, we're talking about poop now, let's swing back to mitochondria. And
Yes.
what exactly do the mitochondria do, and how do we best support them?
So the mitochondria help us, they're little structures within the cell, and they take the food that we ate that was broken down into the sugar molecule, glucose, or an amino acid molecule, or a ketone body if they're fat. They come into the mitochondria converts that energy into something called adenosine triphosphate, which our cells use to run the chemistry of life. So on the most basic level, it is the engine that runs life. And all of our cells rely on mitochondria. The more intense the work that cell has to do, the more mitochondria it will have. So the most mitochondria per cell are in our brain, the retina of your eyes, because that's seeing the continuous movie, and in our heart, up to like 10,000 mitochondria per cell. So that's really quite
Wow.
huge. So big things that we can do is, one, you have to stop poisoning them. So get rid of the sugar, get rid of pesticide exposures in a lot of our toxins. Chronic antibiotics can be a problem because the mitochondria are really ancient bacteria. And then the nourishment. So B vitamins, creatine, carnitine, coenzyme Q, minerals, sulfur, magnesium are really very, very helpful. And I
And
have to say, the Wahls diet was designed around making sure that your mitochondria will have the building blocks they need to function really well.
And keeping the mitochondria healthy long term can really impact aging and longevity, right? We know that's the big
Oh,
buzzword,
absolutely.
anti-aging. So let's talk about that. How does all of this, how does your protocol impact our health in general?
You know, if you look at photos of me, it's really pretty fun because you see up to my nadir at age 52, I'm rapidly aging, and I'm probably looking about 10 to 15 years older than biologic age or chronologic age. And then I implement, my diet and my lifestyle. I'm up out of the chair, walking around, and I'm looking steadily younger, younger, and younger. Although my hair is getting more gray. And this is what we see in our clinics, and this is what we see in our clinical trials. As people implement all this stuff, they typically look and feel about 10 years younger, occasionally 15 to 20. This has to do with improved mitochondrial health, improved cellular function. When we've looked at telomeres, including when I've looked at my own telomeres, which is a marker of biologic aging, we often see that people are biologically 10 years younger than their chronologic age. That has to do with improving the health of your telomeres, the health of your mitochondria. And again, this is all about diet and lifestyle, improving the nutrient density of your diet, adding stress reduction, adding exercise. As people work with us in a more advanced way, then we add in time-restricted feeding, intermittent fasting, and some fasting strategies, which boost mitochondrial efficiency even further and can also boost stem cells even further.
So that was actually my next question. How about fasting and
Yes,
the ketogenic
yes.
diet? How does that affect our mitochondria and our health?
Well, yeah, this has to do with something called hormesis. And hormesis is gentle stress, so the mild to moderate range for a cellular process, followed by a period of rest and recovery. So in terms of fasting, what we've done is we've reduced calories below what you normally need.
What would
And
it be?
so
What would it be
for
for an average
stress,
person?
so we can do this either by a time-restricted feeding, so we have a longer period where we're eating no calories. And that might be 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours of no calories. And that provides a mild stress to our cells. That signal, again, to our cells and our mitochondria, really revs up the efficiency, the effectiveness, and the number of mitochondria. So that's one way. It's called time-restricted feeding. Another way of doing that is a couple days a week have greatly reduced calories, such as just 500 calories. And so that's a pretty light day.
Wow. Yeah.
One moderate-sized meal. Another way of doing this is having a longer version of either no calories or a reduced calorie, like 500 calories a day. And if you're going to do the periodic fasting, you really want to work with your personal physician who can monitor your blood pressure, your blood sugar, and be sure that you're tolerating that well. To all of these, you want to be sure that it's a mild stress followed by a recovery and a refeeding period.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm so proud of you and proud for you, because I know you're really making a dent in the world by the clinical trials, the proof that you're bringing to
Yes.
Clinicians, to patients, that our lifestyle and what we put in our body and on our body certainly has a huge impact on our health. So maybe you started off with MS, but it goes so much further.
Yes.
So much wider. So
yeah, in our clinics, we see it's helpful for many autoimmune diseases. We've had rheumatoid arthritis, systemic lupus, fibromyalgia, a wide variety. We've also seen it very helpful with cancer. For people to use these concepts as they go through chemotherapy, it's reduced the severity of the side effects of the chemotherapy, and certainly appears to be improving survivorship. So many, many implications.
yes. So tell us where people can get your information. And you also have a new book coming out. It's the revived version
Yes.
of the Wahls protocol.
So if you go to my website, terrywahls.com, you can get lots of information there. And if you put in terrywahls.com/diet, we have a one-page handout that summarizes our dietary plan. If you go to terrywahls.com/research papers, then you can also get copies of our research papers and see the videos of these dramatic gait changes that people can achieve. We have a new updated version of my book, which is about a third new material, more information on dietary plans, how to deal with histamines, oxalate, FODMAPs, who needs the elimination diet. We talk more about fasting, about strategies to boost your stem cells in your blood circulation, for what indications stem cell transplants are now being investigated, more on neuro rehab. And as I said, all in all, it's about a third new material.
Amazing. When is it coming out?
March 17th.
Okay, make sure I get a copy.
It'll be exciting.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Terry. Appreciate your time. This is Dr. V sending you a big healing heart hug until our next Wellness Warriors podcast. Bye for now.